Good morning and welcome to Viewpoint, your program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. This morning we have an excellent guest, and it's going to be a mystery guest until I shut up. I'd like to start Viewpoint. We always try to start with a kudo or two. And so I'm going to go to the Christian Village, where I reside now. Every Tuesday they have coffee for the boys, and Thursday they have coffee for the ladies. And at the men's coffee, a fellow by the name of Bill Dennis, he's very active in the Marine Corps League here. He comes and he shines all of our shoes, for goodness sakes, and insists we bring our shoes, and if I wear cotton shoes, he doesn't like it. And another assistant to us out there is Marcia Fernandez. She's been up here with us with Bill's Joe Shaler. She's very active in helping veterans, and she always brings us some baked goodies. So kudos to Marcia Fernandez and Bill Dennis. And with that, Mr. Kirby, I pass the baton to you, sir.
All right. Well, he's a return guest, actually, informing us of all things with the restoration with the Logan County Courthouse. Bill Walter, who is the restoration specialist at Masonry Rehabilitation Technologies and Services. So.
That's a long title.
Good morning, gentlemen. We have long since ago shortened it to MRTS. It makes a lot of people want to continue conversations with us.
Well, Mr. Walters, the first question I want to ask is, when this project all started, and thanks to the taxpayers for passing that referendum again, we had to put a lot of steel I-beams and so forth across our parapet walls.
Yes.
And it seems to me like an unconscionable, not maybe that's a wrong word, but an ungodly amount of weight on those perimeter walls. Now, we have to check those walls when all the weight's taken off to look for any cracks in mortar or anything?
We will. We don't anticipate any. The engineers had calculated by distributing the point load throughout many locations around the perimeter of the building, and as you know, they go into the dome itself, to the interior spaces, and are supported. The other end of those beams that you see are supported inside on masonry bearing walls. So we have the weight distributed more than appropriately. It would be a phenomenal surprise if anything, I'll say, major occurs. You might have a few stress fractures that we'll take care of, but absolutely nothing structural.
Well, we're lucky to have Bill Walters on this job site. I think he probably aced trigonometry 101. You have to be a real scientist to this is an art. And by the way, I was told that to work with this metal, it's copper, I guess.
Yes.
That you have to have special needs and or special skills.
You do. It is like with any other trade. You don't have to, but everything works out a whole lot better if you do. You get a much more disciplined and correct procedure. In addition to aesthetically, it is much more pleasing. If you take something like plumbing, a talented plumber will know the precise route a pipe should take, what elbows and angles and directions, etc. You can have a not so talented plumber and he can still go from point A to point B, but it looks like a hodgepodge. Yeah. And it may not produce an efficient system from an operational standpoint. We look at the copper the same way. The issues a lot of times with copper is once you bend it, that visual bend, even if you straighten the piece back out again, will still be in the copper. So you can't make a mistake where the final result will show and exhibit all of the problems that you incurred putting this whole system together. So we want the most talented craftsmen, so they do it right and do it right the first time. The old adage, the old carpenter's adage, measure twice and cut once, that pertains to copper work as well. You can't stretch copper, so if you cut it too short, that's a problem. If you bend it in the wrong location, that's a problem. So they look at it and they study it and they make sure that before they cut or bend, that they're doing it in the precise location that is needed. When all of the pieces are put together, then they're obviously soldered, or they have mechanical seams so that the end result is not going to produce any leaks to the inside, which is why we're here to begin with.
Yeah, Lloyd, I think we probably ought to go back to the beginning, don't you? There might be one or two listeners out there that haven't been downtown, don't know what they're going on around the courthouse square. So, Mr. Walters, if you'll take us from the beginning and how your firm was hired by the County Board of Supervisors and what your charge was from them.
I got an interesting phone call one day from, at the time, the Director of Buildings and Grounds, Dave Blankenship, and he was an inquisitive sort. He was a very thorough sort, and we must have talked for 2 hours, our initial phone conversation. He had obviously been in with the courthouse and in with the people, and had recognized the fact that there was an age-long problem with water leaking to the inside. What I discovered, what everybody here knew all along, in the 70s, they had actually covered the copper on the existing dome with a fiberglass system, complete with the mesh and the materials, etc., and they molded it to the configuration of the dome, and at the time it solved their problem, and that problem was water leaks. It was induced primarily because you had a pigeon problem, and they wanted to get rid of the pigeons, so they equipped several or many individuals, I'm not sure how many, with little rifles, and they took care of the pigeons. They also took care of the dome, creating a lot of holes. And you had what we see all the time is wear and tear. The continual water running in particular places will eventually wear the copper down. That typically takes 50 to 100 years, depends on many other factors. So you had a combination of reasons. The most efficient, most economical method at that time, at least according to the fiberglass salesman, was to use his product, put it on the dome, and that solves your leaking problems. Back in the 90s, there was an elastomeric coating that was applied over the top of the fiberglass because the fiberglass itself was starting to deteriorate. The lifespan, especially when you're exposed to all the UV rays that are proximate to that dome, etc., was breaking down that material. So they coated it, so you just compounded the accumulation of materials on the dome until we find ourselves today, or what was a few years ago, with Dave looking at the problem and wondering, how am I ever going to get this taken care of? More and more water was occurring as the fiberglass system was exfoliating from the copper. It was tearing, water was getting in underneath it and traveling to who knows where and finding a way into the inside. He had to solve it. He called around to quite a number of other facilities, wondering what they had done to correct the problem or who they were dealing with. And I was fortunate because my name popped up more than once. And he thought possibly there was something to that. Decided to give me a call, and we talked, like I said, for a long time, the initial phone conversation, to the point where my curiosity and my interest was piqued. And I told Dave, and I was in northern Illinois at the time, so it was not a big out-of-the-way excursion for me to come and visit with Dave and look at the facility. And once you take a look at it, it's a gorgeous facility. And I told him, I said, I would like to present a proposal and let you know what I can do for you folks. And the rest is history.
648-5510. Our guest this morning, Mr. Bill Walters. He's the gentleman who's responsible for putting your courthouse back in shape, good physical shape. And as you wander around the courthouse, you see that the work's still going on around the dome up there, and you may wonder what's going on. If you call and talk to Mr. Walters, thank him for coming. This is not his first rodeo here at WLCN, and he goes to a lot of work to come and fill in as a guest and inform our county, our listeners, as to what the heck's going on. So we appreciate, Bill, you're taking your time very, very much. to boring right in here, Lloyd, where are we right now here on February the 8th?
We are making, and again, for those that have driven by, they have noticed a considerable amount of activity occurring down on the ground level of the courthouse. There is the project that is associated with redoing the copper on the dome. Before I get into everything else, I'll state that we're approximately 85% complete with the dome installation as it works its way up to the top, which is coincidental with the base of the cupola, which people can still see. Once that is achieved, then we have a contractor coming in and working on redoing the copper on the cupola. We have to reconfigure the steel scaffolding in order for him to achieve that. So we want to finish the base dome first to get all of their craftsmen to each individual point that they have to. Then we'll reconfigure the steel scaffolding, take care of the cupola. Then we'll start tearing the scaffolding down from the top down. And as we go down, then the craftsmen that are associated with the copper will detail all the areas as it comes down, because once the scaffolding is down, then you lose the opportunity to tend to little areas that may need the I's dotted and T's crossed, so to speak. So that is happening. While that's happening, we are undergoing the main focus of the restoration project, and that is installing the new HVAC system. We had selected the geothermal process, so people had noticed the drilling that had been occurring on the outside, which has been completed. The ground is still it's leveled off now, but it's still in major upheaval, still surrounded by chain link fence, etc. But there was upwards of 30 plus cores that were drilled in the ground, approximately 400 feet deep, and this is going to be where the geothermal takes effect and moderates the temperature of the water and fluid that flows through the system.
So our courthouse is going to be heated and cooled.
Yes, sir.
Geothermal.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. And it's a process that involves the exterior portion, which is for the most part complete. Now the interior, where we have to take apart the existing boiler system, the one boiler has been completely removed. The other boiler is still operational because we want to make sure the folks still have a certain comfort level while we're putting in the new system. That particular system is probably in the 70% range of being complete, and we're working our way up through the floors of the courthouse. Eventually we'll get to the courtrooms, and we'll then transition the folks that occupy the interior, the judges, the employees, and the elected individuals, appointed individuals. We'll move them out so that we can conduct the installation and not really interfere with too many things.
So with so many moving parts and so many different, the cupola area and the copper work and the geothermal heating, how do you decide what happens when? Is that based on weather or when particular specialists are available? Or
we try, as silly as this sounds, we try not to pay attention to the weather, which is silly. Obviously, the craftsmen that are working up on the dome have to be very particular about what conditions they work under. It's hard to solder copper when it's 10 below zero. Same way it's hard to install when it's raining because you don't necessarily want to lock in any moisture underneath what you're installing. So they do pay attention to it, but we can't be steered totally away, otherwise we'd shut down for 5 months.
Something we have to pay attention to, Mr. Waller, is sponsors. Either that or we wouldn't have Bill Walters up here. So go right ahead, Mr. Ash.
back on Viewpoint. Now I'm on. Back on Viewpoint 832 and talking with Bill Walter, restoration specialist, dealing with the Logan County Courthouse. Now, before the break, we were talking about how you sort of pick and choose which parts of the project take precedence or go first or second or so forth. And you mentioned weather try to ignore it as much as you can, by and
True.
large.
Yeah, we could very easily get distracted to a point where you don't get any work done. It is also fortunate that we don't have, notwithstanding the winds, it is a little breezy here in Illinois, but we don't have the winters like we used to 25, 30, 40 years ago, which we're very fortunate. Otherwise, we literally would have had to
shut it down.
take a number of months and say we're not going to do anything. So we are able to push ahead for the most part. In answer to the earlier question, how do you determine what to do and when? There are people with much more gray matter between their ears than I have that sit around in skull sessions and calculate how long items are going to take to accomplish, how they intermingle between themselves. That, I think, is more of a challenge than when to do something on its own merit. It's how you're going to do something and when in relationship to this aspect of the job that has to be done compared to this aspect that has to be done, and keeping everything blended. Obviously, some things have to be done sooner because other components of the project need to be reliant on what is done. So there's an order there. And then you intermingle with other trades, electrical, plumbing, as it pertains to the HVAC system. So it's a massive struggle, and the project managers that are there from Verigy, who is handling the installation, are simply magnificent, pardon me, in their ability to coordinate. Communication, I think you would find Brad, who is their lead, is the number one component of his arsenal. He is a master at communication and talks openly and freely, not just to the other contractors who are supplying all the work items, but also to the individuals that are still inside the courthouse. You know, we're going to come into such and such a room and we need to do this for an hour. How will that disturb you in your activities? Is there a particular hour that we can do that where it's going to be of the least amount of disruption? And they get that all figured out, and then they realize, oh my gosh, while they're doing that, then we have to do this over here, and they talk to that individual. We're going to be in here for 2 hours, and we need to do this. How is that going to affect? So it's just a masterful display of an ability to coordinate and then have the contractors in position to accompany and supply what is needed to accomplish this masterful plan. I think that's just brilliant on their part.
And so the supply chain issues that were so prevalent not too long ago, did that throw a major wrench into your schedules and that coordination?
There was actually a whole toolbox full of wrenches that got thrown into it. It was then, and it is still now. And I say that with the understanding that it is getting better. But sometimes, whether you can't get an item for 12 months compared to cannot get that same item for 2 months, there's no difference. It's a monkey wrench, and it throws you off, and all of a sudden that particular process is delayed. But because that process is delayed, how is it affecting the other processes? And that is what is giving us this lengthy project. I'm not going to say that we would have been done by now. Would have been close. It has affected us that severely, and it continues to affect us. We're waiting now on 2 electrical components that will be here in May. I think the last component comes in May, and that's like a 9-month waiting period. It has been extended 3 times already. We're holding our breath, but we're able to do other items like setting the table for a big dinner, where you can put the knives and forks out, the plates and the cups and stuff, but we're not going to eat till Thursday. So we're trying to get as much done as we can from a circuitous standpoint, and then when the components come in, bam, 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 we're able to knock it out. But we have been delayed, and it continues. It continues, and that's why people are seeing and continually questioning the fact what is taking forever. And it's convenient, but it's also incredibly accurate. The supply chain just messes with you.
Mr. Walters, you used a term earlier in our discussion, geothermal. there are a lot of people on the street who have heard the term but have no clue as to what the heck that means. Would you kind of give us a Reader's Digest break on geothermal?
In very simplistic terms, I first learned about the concept when I was young and would go into caves. I loved to explore caves. Legitimate, not that I would go find one and go in by myself, but it was always an interesting phenomena that in the dead of summer, when it was 140,000 degrees outside, it was always cool and nice and refreshing in the wintertime. I mean, inside the cave. Conversely, when it was colder than all get out outside, and you would go into the caves, it was nice and pleasantly warm. There is no climate control in the caves, to speak. They may circulate the air, but there's no thermal control. And I learned subsequent to that when you go into the body of the earth, such as caves are, it regulates its own temperature. It doesn't care what's going on outside. Inside, the earth and all of its mass prescribes that it's going to be right around 55, 56 degrees.
And it stays constant.
Constant. So man, in his infinite wisdom, discovered that if you would circulate a material, a fluid, a water-type material, into this area, no matter what temperature that water is when it went in and circulated through the earth, that when it came out, it would be 55 degrees. It is far easier for a heating and ventilating system to warm water that starts at 55 degrees as opposed to 30 degrees or 35 degrees, which it might be from the city supply once it goes through its pipes to get to your building. The same way during the summertime, it is far easier to cool water that starts out at 55 degrees as opposed to water that starts out at 70 degrees, etc. So you're saving a considerable amount of energy making that water the temperature that you want, whether it's heating for the wintertime or cooling for the summertime. The concept of geothermal is taking advantage of the earth and how it can moderate the water temperature for you, and then you take it and do the rest when it gets inside the building. We've got about 30 plus cores that the engineers figured would be enough based on the size of the courthouse and the demands that the system is going to place on moderating the temperature. Wow. So that's the very simplistic terms.
Well, but however simplistic as it may have been, and by your termination, I'm not sure it's simplistic for the people who are in Alvy's drugstore on the corner having a Coke. So go ahead, Mr. Kirby.
I was just going to ask then, as far as the geothermal system, that's another one of those components that figures into what happens when in terms of the different components to the overall project as far as...
Significantly.
Now, how far deep did you have to go in the courthouse lawn to get this to the strata that you wanted to be at?
We went, all of the holes averaged 400 feet in depth. The hole itself was, I think, anywhere from 12 inches plus or minus all the way down, and it reduces itself the deeper you go. When you install then the appliances that go down into it that handle the circulatory system, once you achieve a certain depth, then it's pretty streamlined. So it's an active array, and it's predominantly on the south and southwest portions of the facility, as people have seen from the mess that was created. And the pipes then would run over to the building itself and come in at the basement level. Mm-hmm. We were able to, we meaning the talented engineers from Verigy, were able to calculate and figure if we did those cores in that location, then we could utilize the pre-existing boiler room to put all of the new equipment, etc. So we're not going to cannibalize any additional spaces to put in this new equipment.
So, efficiency notwithstanding, that is standard temperature in all the rooms. bottom line is that the economics of it is that their utility bills are going to be a heck of a lot less.
Oh my gosh, yes. It is. It was amazing. Excuse me. It was amazing to me when I first came over here to learn that the courthouse had been able to survive, for a lack of a better word, with having no legitimate air conditioning system. They had window units that took care of an immediate small location, but it did not, moderate or modulate the temperature in other areas, maybe as it should. So they were limping along, especially on those hot days. It was uncomfortable inside. The heating system, they had very antiquated boilers down on the basement. I have to give them credit. It was amazing how well they were able to limp along and keep those units going. The more in recent years that it broke down, the harder it was to get parts. And again, that all led to, wow, while we're doing this work, we really need to look at that. What I saw from a distance when I came here was the lack of climate control to the interior was wreaking havoc on a lot of the building materials inside.
Sure.
The fact that you had excessive moisture at one time of the year and significantly depleted moisture at other times of the year, and the temperature fluctuations, notwithstanding the discomfort that the people that were in the building were experiencing, that was a major concern. And was an equal bullet point to everything else. We needed to make the people inside that work there day in and day out comfortable. We needed to make the people that came in, for whatever reason, the general public, we had to make them comfortable. And then we had to devise a system that would be efficient, that would take care of putting the temperature and the humidity where it needed to be 365 days out of the year. And as you just brought up at the very beginning of this segment, and save money all at the same time. There's going to be an interesting benchmark. There's not like a pre-existing system that showed us what the expenses were for utilities, but we're able to extrapolate and say, based on the addition of this equipment, this is what it's going to be. And then over a period of time, this energy system is going to be modulated, and as long as it shows the county saving money, it's fine. Once it doesn't, then the company with the manufacturers, Verigy, has to reimburse the county for any money over that efficiency standard. So there's really no way the county can lose money. But we're banking on the fact that it's going to be that efficient that we're going to save that much money.
You made a comment there about the difference in temperature sort of wreaking havoc on the structure itself and some of the materials. When you come in initially to survey and look and see what a project of this undertaking will involve, how do you go about doing that? Because obviously some of the structural damage is not just something you can look at a wall and see. So do you have, drill in and look with cameras, or do you peel some layers back? What is the process for that?
Initially, it was given to us on a silver platter. If you've been in the courthouse, you've noticed that the ceramic tile floor is cracked, chipped, and kind of displacing itself, so it's out of plane, close to trip hazards in some areas. So we started digging in and wondering, why is that happening? And that is a measure of the fluctuation. To go into detail just for a moment, underneath the ceramic tile is a high lime content bedding mortar that absorbs moisture like a sponge. So when you have the high humid days, that takes on a lot of moisture and it swells. Lime by nature will swell when it gets wet. And when it swells, then it displaces the structural matrix and it cracks. Once you have a crack, then every time the maintenance crew at the courthouse mopped the floor, you got more moisture in. So it kind of was a self-fulfilling prophecy, a snowball. It just kept compounding itself. You look around at the wood and how it, over a period of time, like your residential homes, Why is it during the summertime when the wood swells that the door doesn't open and close properly? Or during the wintertime when you want it to fit tight, it's loose, and you got gaps, it shrinks and swells based on moisture. So you can see that in the wood. You can see the cracking. You can see the finish on the wood that is failing for the most part. All of these signs kind of lead you to the fact that, wow, something is affecting it, and you eliminate all the variables, and you come down to, must be the moisture, must be the fluctuation in temperature and the humidity.
648-551. Our guest this morning, Mr. Bill Walters, the gentleman making things work at the courthouse. As you walk around the courthouse dome, you look at what's going on up there. It's been like that for a number of months now. Looking down the calendar, what month would you tear the page off that you think you'll be done, Mr. Walter?
We are looking at July, perhaps the very first part of August, to have the dome complete. We think that the process of tearing the scaffolding apart and the steel I-beams, et cetera, will be a month process by itself. That incorporates the craftsman kind of traveling with the dismantling of the scaffolding, doing its little tidying up, dotting I's, crossing T's, if you will, on the copper. We call it the PC contract, which is the performance contract involving the HVAC and the electrical and plumbing upgrades as it pertains to this system. And all of the accoutrement, we're putting in new LED lights in the drop ceiling, new panels, etc., all to enhance the energy conservation. We didn't want to have a screen door on a submarine type situation looking at us. That we put in this beautiful HVAC system, and then we burn out all the profits on antiquated light fixtures, etc. This all is a product of how do we save money? How do we make this more efficient? To the point where the American Recovery Act is going to come into play, and we're having meetings currently about that. The county should get back a very nice, respectable amount of money because we're putting in the geothermal, because we're putting in the LED light fixtures, etc. We are excited about that, and that's why we're doing this, to be recognized and rewarded for having an efficient system, and obviously to be rewarded by its efficiency all by itself.
And you know, Mr. Walter and listeners, we all should be excited about this courthouse project. Had they done nothing, had the taxpayers not made that referendum possible, I'll be gone, which may be pretty quickly right now. But seriously, in the near future, that building would have been in terrible shape, maybe not reparable.
We had studied that fact. There was a considerable amount of conversation at the very beginning about whether it is to be restored or whether they wanted to move out of the town square into another facility. Maybe
what a
even
disaster.
Tear down this building and build a new one. Fortunately, that cost was incredibly prohibitive, and the idea was scrapped. And in my perspective, I'm a preservationist. The right people came up front and said, we want to keep this. We want to respect, and we want to be good stewards in our position with the county and do what's right. We all made the decision. When I say we, the county and all of its folks, especially it was indicated during the referendum. It was presented to them, this is what we think is needed. This is what we want to do for all the people of the county, and this is how we want the courthouse to be when we're done. What say you? And the county responded incredibly so, better than 60% favorability on the referendum vote.
You know, not having lived here, Mr. Walters, you might not be aware of the fact that the old Sangamon County courthouse was taken apart piece by piece, and they marked the pieces and stored them out at the state fairgrounds, and they did their work there, put it in an underground garage and all that, and they brought that building back piece by piece and put it back just like it was. I thought that was a remarkable piece of preservation and engineering.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And today, as I said here, February the 8th, 2023, they have that wonderful old magnificent state capitol building in the downtown center of Springfield.
See, we were involved just by coincidence with a project similar to that in Ohio, where a nondescript, I mean, it wasn't a courthouse or a capitol building, but a very significant historical building. They took down all the stone pieces, completely gutted the inside. Stone pieces were out in the field, and we were commissioned to put them back. We didn't have markings. We didn't have the opportunity to follow a map and say this piece goes here, this piece goes here.
Somebody had a real idea to make a jigsaw out of it.
Yes. We've spent many a summer afternoons in the field wondering, where does this fit, where does that fit? It is an appreciation that goes beyond description when you can do that to a building. And they do it now almost as a hobby, taking down old historic barns and rebuilding them and making them worth 1,000 times more than what they should be. But it's adorable craftsmanship and respect for what had been constructed early.
As you moved along on this project, from at one point in time you could get copper easily, and the next day you order some more copper, and that's going to be a big backlog. What is your position today as we sit here on the amount of materials necessary to complete your job, sir?
In fact, we were just talking about that yesterday, that we got in just at the right time as far as copper is concerned. Now, we were besieged with issues and supply issues in the very beginning. And when commerce was shut down between ourselves and Canada because of the COVID, a significant supply of copper was terminated. And to find in the United States an adequate supply brought an incredible price tag. So much so, it was above $1 million extra that we would have to pay to get the copper and the mechanics where we needed them to be. It was far outside of our budget. Fortunately, in continual conversations and continual investigations, etc., we delayed the decision long enough to where commerce reopened. And that's when things started to fall into place. There's one major Canada supplier and fabricator who is involved with making a lot of the designs of the copper that you'll see. But that completed what we needed, and we were able to get excellent cooperation from contractors in the States that would actually do the installation. So that helped, made it all possible. Just within the last month, we're seeing reports that there is going to be a significant problem with copper supply for the next 2 years, starting pretty much this month. Nobody's hoarding the copper per se, although I suspect there's a little bit of that going on. And then they'll turn around and sell it for a most healthy profit.
Yeah.
But there is a legitimate supply issue for copper. So we were able to sneak in. That's a roundabout way of answering your question. We think we're going to be okay. From if one would look at the big picture, the majority of the courthouse, we should be okay. We'll have little incidental problems, whether even a small thing like a fuse, a breaker, 75 down, made in Mexico. They're 5,000 units behind, so you're not going to get that for 16, 18 months. That could significantly affect the completion of an electrical panel that we have to put in. Transfer switches, etc. All those things, we'll have to play. It's like playing dice. If we hope the numbers come up correctly each time. And so far, we have enough people in the right spot doing research and knowing when things are coming in and which things we have to maybe investigate and get from other sources. They're doing a great job. I think we're going to be okay.
648-5510. This is your last crack at having a chance to ask a question. What's going on at the courthouse? And Mr. Bill Walters, who is in charge of this project, must be like a circus juggler with 6 balls. Excuse the expression.
That's why he's in the circus to begin with.
Exactly. So what, as a preservationist, what sort of inspired you to get into that field, and what's the I don't know, the most rewarding part of doing what you do?
That's my family. My grandfather came over from Germany, and he and his brother, after the war, started to get into fixing up masonry buildings. Not so much building new masonry buildings. They saw a need, and there was a lot of military people that wanted work after the war, so they put together a company and went around with school buildings and fixing the masonry and mortars, etc. My dad then followed suit and got involved. He had it more from a business standpoint. My grandfather probably was more interested, like myself, in the architectural aspect of it and the rehabilitating the character of the building. I was from the time I could walk, all I heard at the dinner table was fixing masonry buildings. I had the opportunity, and I consider myself incredibly lucky. I was able to study in Europe, and I was able to study here in the States, and I was able to see the craftsmen and learn from the craftsmen and fulfill my sponge-like need to get as much information as possible. When you're able to canvas a large territory, you can see how people react to their buildings. And it is a possessive thing. They think of them as part of who makes up them. Their character, their personality is a result of where they're at, and where they're at are the buildings. In Germany, I have family, and they are 3 and 4 generations working on the same building. Grandchild would say, I remember when Grandpa told me he did the steeple on this church. Now I'm working on the steeple. It is a matter of significant pride, and you can't help if you just stand next to them long enough to by osmosis, just absorb that kind of feeling towards buildings. And it has worked here very successfully for us.
Bill Walter, we appreciate very much, again, you've been very generous with your time. We appreciate your taking that extra effort, and it requires that. It isn't like he isn't busy all day long down there, Lloyd. So thank you very much for Viewpoint. Too bad you missed out. We know now, and you don't know, listeners. Thank you very much for Viewpoint.
Absolutely.